Hello, this is Jeffrey and Ciel Backstrom. We're here today to give you an introduction on holotropic breathwork. And before we actually dive into some of the nuts and bolts of breathwork, we'll both tell you a little bit about how we got involved with this. So Jeffrey, why don't you start?
Well, a few years ago, I was attending a workshop given by a man up in Michigan that I'd somehow run into, and it was a Jungian scholar, and I was interested in that stuff, and kind of without our recognizing that was going to be part of the program, he was doing a form of breath work, and having had quite a bit of experience with non-ordinary states of consciousness prior to that, I was really delighted with the power of this very simple technique, and I felt like I made some important breakthroughs, had some important kinds of experience with this, so we just got kind of excited about it, and got hold of the people at the Holotropic Breathwork Association here in the States and started to go to their modules, and one thing led to another. Here we are.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, in my case, I first started hearing about holotropic breathwork. Just those words would come to me in at different occasions, and it began to kind of pique my interest. When my interest got really piqued was, and during one of our trips to Peru, we became friends with a European psychotherapist who had been using more of a form of talk therapy with his patients for quite a number of years and wasn't really happy with some of the results he was getting. He didn't feel like his clients were moving as quickly as he wanted them to. So he started looking into other modalities, including holotropic breathwork. And there was something about him talking about holotropic breathwork as a methodology for moving people forward, especially people in stuck places, that I really thought, this is something I want to learn more about. And then it was Jeffrey who first went to a breathwork weekend in Michigan that he just referred to and came home and said, yeah, we need to look into this more. So I tagged along and found out that I really liked what was the more that we were discovering from holotropic breathwork. I'd like to next move on to give you a bit of an overview of what holotropic breathwork is. You have probably heard the terminology breathwork before. Holotropic breathwork is a particular form of breathwork that was developed by Stan Grof and his wife Christina. What Stan particularly was noticing was that when people enter into a non-ordinary state of awareness, that old patterns that may be kind of running their lives begin to be loosened and freed. And when this happens, that these old patterns get loosened and freed, then life naturally moves towards greater ease and growth and wholeness. Stan named this process holotropic breathwork. He coined the expression holotropic. Most of us have used this word tropic in another form that's pretty commonly known, and that would be the form of heliotropic. Helios meaning sun, and tropic meaning turning towards or moving toward. And so what Stan wanted to name this process holotropic, meaning moving towards wholeness. He felt that humans, just like a sunflower is naturally a heliotropic plant, it moves towards the sun, to face the sun, that humans are holotropic organisms, and that we move towards wholeness. But he found that there were techniques that helped us move towards wholeness very, very easily. And the one that he developed is a process of faster, deeper, connected breaths, assisted by evocative music that leads people inwardly into a non-ordinary state of awareness. Now, Jeffrey, I'd like you to share a little bit more about what was the background that even led him to understanding that ordinary states of awareness might be of value to us.
Yeah, so coming back to Stan's work, Stanislav Grof gives you the notion of somewhere to the east of Europe, and in fact, he was a Czech psychotherapist before he became an American. And it's just an interesting turn of events, and some of you may have heard the story of Albert Hoffman and accidentally taking into his body a chemical he was looking at, and then going for a bicycle ride and having quite a ride. And so that was the discovery of LSD. And Hoffman sent a few vials of this to a fairly well-known already Czech psychiatrist, thinking he might be able to use it in his therapeutic regime, and that man was Stan Grof. And so this is mid-50s. Stan's doing research using LSD in psychotherapy, and had hundreds of clients, and felt like this was really going somewhere. Got a chance to emigrate to the U.S. Soon was at Johns Hopkins. He was, if I can get the term right, he was the chief of psychiatric research at the Maryland Research Center there at Johns Hopkins, and he's the person who had this major research study ongoing with worked with thousands of patients before the whole LSD thing kind of got out of control, and was the Congress decided to stop any use of LSD even for clinical research. So what does a man do? Well, what Stan did is he moved to the West Coast out of Esalen, and sat with some others and looked carefully into the literature. Really the question was, how can this non-ordinary state be achieved, this non-ordinary state that has specific, very beneficial qualities, without the use of the chemical? And holotropic breathwork was the answer to that. So the non-ordinary state that was discovered in a certain form with LSD and then furthered with holotropic breathwork, but both in the context of this therapeutic direction. How can we use it to help people heal? And I just want to say a little bit about that term, non-ordinary states, NOS. We may not think about it because we're like the fish that's always swimming in the same bowl, but there are things about our ordinary state that are kind of limiting it. It's got these 3-4 time-space dimensions. It's consensual. That is to say, we call the ordinary reality that which we would all agree, yes, there's a chair there. Yes, this is an apple. And so a non-ordinary state takes us beyond that consensual reality, and as it happens, often more deeply into our own psyche, perhaps our soul, the objects of our perception that do not lie in this ordinary space. And the usefulness of that is that very often those qualities that we're not contacting, but which are there, are things that we really ought to have a look at. They may be the unconnected memories of old trauma. They may be fears that we bought into in early childhood, and which we've completely forgotten we have, but which may still be running us. How do we then connect with that material, holotropic, toward wholeness, moving toward getting at everything that's part of our psyche, but do it in a safe way. Well, Stan used LSD and psychotherapy in a context where there was always a sitter. There was always someone for that subject person to be in connection with, to help him or her move through the process. The same is the case in holotropic breathwork. You're not alone. There's someone there with you. There's a trained facilitator that are with you, so that you can move through whatever processes arise in your inner journey. So the thing to know that I'd like to emphasize before we turn it back over to CL is there's nothing specific to expect. That is, there's not a fixed sequence that we should plan on going through. And in fact, it'll be essential that we don't even come in with the idea that, oh, today I'm going to work on X, what happened with that, or what happened with that. It's not like you have to expunge that notion somehow, but the idea is to enter into that state and then trust the, Stan calls it the inner healer, which is to say that tendency we have in us to move in this direction toward wholeness, to trust that to take us forward and to connect with and integrate with whatever is the next piece that we need to work on. So there's a range of inner experience that's possible, and turn it back over to you, CL, to tap into that.
Yeah, thank you. Just as Jeffrey was saying, there's no expected experience that would happen during the holotropic breathwork session, or an expected order of experiences to have, but there is a range that we like to share with people before they have their holotropic process or experience, just to give you a kind of the whole picture of what might happen. So one of the ranges of experiences that might happen in a holotropic breathwork session is what we would call energetic or physical. Now, some examples of this could be that you find that in response to this rapid, deeper, connected breath and the music, is that there is some kind of maybe shaking of the body or tingling in the body. And it could also be that the body moves into positions that are a little surprising. Sometimes even almost like someone is doing a yoga position. That doesn't happen every time, but it can happen, these kind of physical manifestations of the breathwork process. We call those energetic or physical. And they could be very obviously seen on the outside, or they might just be sort of more subtle energy running in the body. Another whole range of experience that can happen is what we would call biographical. And biographical, we talk about experiences that we have had from birth up until today, up until now. And often what happens if a biographical experience arises during breathwork, it would represent a biographical experience that didn't get resolved in some way. Sometimes we call those unresolved biographical experiences traumatic, and they could be some things that feel classically traumatic, something that has some kind of assault or something like that, a lack of care, a huge lack of care when we were children. But it could be something that's just something that's not resolved. It could be, for instance, the death of a loved one, which is a very natural occurrence, happens in everyone's life. But if it doesn't get completed, that process doesn't get completed, things get stuck inside of us and keep us from moving towards wholeness. So those are examples of biographical experiences that might come forward in a breathwork session. And they might come up as literal memories or a little more symbolically. Another, so those are two, both the energetic and physical or the biographical. Another range of experiences that can come up during a holotropic breathwork session could be a word that many therapists use, especially Stan was very influential in this form of therapy called transpersonal. Other people might call it mythopoetic, but these are experiences that don't seem to be related to our own biographical history. but they seem to be, but not just purely physical in manifestation. They might seem archetypal. So maybe we get in touch with some more archetypal energy, like the wounded healer or the great mother. Or it could be something that feels more mythic, legendary, like we feel like we're in an epic battle or something like that. It could feel like experiences of past lives or past times, like we feel like we've gotten transported to the United States at the time of our founding fathers. There's just a feeling sense of that. So these, as I said, these kind of experiences are not contained to our personal biography. They could also feel like we got transported to another completely life on Earth, or not in human form, like we feel like we are amongst the dinosaurs how many thousands of years ago with that. So again, beyond our own kind of personal sense of time and space, out of that consensual reality that Jeffrey was speaking about a little while, and into non-consensual reality. Or it could be some sort of feeling of maybe what we'd call the collective, a kind of energetic space that people are sharing right now, like the energetic feeling of a country. If you think of different countries around the world right now, they might be encapsulating a particular need or something like that. We might feel the sense of that. So those are what we call transpersonal. They go beyond our own personhood. So those are three. And then the last range of experiences that Stan was noticing was what he called experiences that seem to encapsulate or mirror the time of our birth, just before birth, and just shortly after birth. He called those perinatal, meaning surrounding that process of being born. And he divided the perinatal experiences into 4 different matrices that both represented that what literally happens to us during that process of gestation and birth, but also can become very symbolic. The first matrix, he talked about the time when we're a fetus in utero. And the experience of a fetus in utero can often be one of being completely taken care of, having no needs, having a very spacious, comfortable surroundings, maybe kind of floating in that amniotic fluid. Now, there's also a possibility that our own birth, our in gestation period, was to a toxic womb. Perhaps we had a mother who was addicted to alcohol or non-prescribed drugs, or even a prescription drug. And those kind of chemicals were flooding us in utero as well. And so then that safe womb doesn't feel quite so safe. But Stan suggested there could be experiences like that arise during holotropic breathwork experience. And when they do arise, they're not always so clearly, oh, this is a experience of being in utero. It might just be a feeling of spaciousness, being cared for, ultimate relaxation, or the experience of being in a toxic environment. The next phase of the birth process he describes as being very different is when the contractions start. So the mother is now in labor, but this is the experience from the fetus's point of view. The cervix is closed. There's no way out, but there's these huge contractions that are going on. Now, having been a biological mother myself, when I had birth coaches that talked to me all about the stages of labor and the contractions. So when they started, I wasn't surprised. In fact, I thought, oh, this means sometime in the next, 4 or 5 hours to the next 2 or 3 days, I'm very likely to have a baby. So for me, there was this excitement. But when I think about what was it like for that fetus who doesn't know anything other than the home that has been of comforting one is now compressing, huge amount of compression going on, and no way to stop it and no way out. So that feeling of oppression, of heaviness, of kind of panic that's happening for that child, that fetus at this point in time, have no way out. So we've gone from perhaps a spacious, everything's cared for, to now, what's going on? No way out. There can also be at this time too some confusion because the contractions often start with the mother through a hormonal change, and so then the baby is thinking, what is this? Now, the next phase of birth that he talks about, the third matrix, is when the cervix at the base, the opening of the uterus, starts to open. And so the head is beginning to come through the cervix, come through the birth canal, but still, there's still these contractions, there's still this confusion. Says that it might symbolically feel almost like a battle now. There's some movement, but it still feels like a struggle is going on. Stan says also if there's some form of forceps or assisting of pulling the baby out, that can feel another kind of shock to the baby. When the baby's head crowns at the opening of the vagina, the baby can become in contact with no longer just the amniotic fluid, but now other kinds of biological fluid from the mother as well. There might be blood and fecal matter, things like that. So suddenly, again, a lot more stimulus, a lot more chaos. It's also fairly common for the mother at the point of the baby going through the cervix that she actually has an orgasm. And so then another flood of emotions, all confusing for this, what had been just shortly before a fetus in utero with all the needs taken care of. Now there's a lot of struggle, battle feelings. And then the fourth matrix is when the actual baby is out of the whole birth canal, a feeling again of expansion. And in the case of a natural birth where there's no complications, that baby is now put to the mother's breast. And this feeling of, oh, Stan even says almost like, oh, the goddess, I'm home. That familiar heartbeat once again, the caring, nurturing feeling of the mother. So this can be another feeling of expansion, of freedom. So he talks about these 4 distinct stages and how something of them, the qualities of them, can also come during the breathwork experience, but they come more like projections. And I'd like to let Jeffrey talk about how it was not real clear, like, oh, now I'm going through the through that second matrix. It feels like no way out and things like that. It doesn't come that simply. They come in more, they get crossed into often biological memories. And Jeffrey, why don't you share a little bit about how that could show up?
Yeah, great. And I also want to take just a moment to help us kind of all be on the same page, because we're kind of throwing a fair amount to you at this point. So we talked we kind of are breaking things down into some categories. It's always useful to kind of parse things apart a bit when you're trying to get accustomed to them. So the first we had these 4 categories of experience that your holotropic breathwork session might relate to: energetic and physical, biographical events that happened in the past, and transpersonal or archetypal. And then another angle is this birth perinatal matrix of these 4 stages of the birth process. And Stan's using that. So, we've used this word archetypal a few times. So the archetype is kind of like blueprint. It's kind of like the underlying theme of an event. So, or many events. It's kind of subtle level presence. And we can then, as CL was just doing in the case of the archetype of these 4 birth matrices, describing how our experience in breath work and frankly our experience in a lot of occasions in life may be like one of these 4 perinatal matrices. And when you consider that birth process is the first thing that this incarnated spirit, this body mind, experienced. So those are automatically the archetypes that we come into this lifetime with. So what I wanted to do, and what CL was asking me to do, is just relate the qualities of these 4 matrices a little more to what our experience is. So the first one, I think you already did a great job of this, but just to add a little more, the in utero period, I think of it kind of like an experience of transcendence, or and that might be with a capital T, like really feeling like you're in the presence of the divine. Or it might just, maybe it's a smaller case T. It's like, okay, I just had a great meal. I had a nice glass of wine with the meal. The temperature is perfect. There's a rhythm to the wind in the trees, and I am just feeling at ease. Everything is fine. And then, of course, there's the possibility everything's not fine. So even in that case, suddenly that wind is a stormy, threatening wind, or something's compressing in. So that would be using that archetypal form to characterize the sort of experience one is having. Another might be, so the second matrix, where we begin to feel this closing in on us, maybe the job that we either initially thought we would like, or that we frankly took just because we need it, has become just a pain to get up and go to every day. And yet we know we need that income. So we do it, but we have a feeling of I'm trapped, and it's just getting more and more compressed. It's more than I can handle. So that is what that archetype of the second matrix of the contractions might feel like in life. So the reason we're taking the time to go through these is to help you to be prepared by being somewhat familiar with this range of experience. And it's one of the useful things in helping us to navigate through this work and recognize that we're safe. Maybe that realization might even arise during a breathwork session. Oh, yes, this is like that kind of thing they were talking about, where it just feels like it's too much to carry. I've been in this situation for so long. I need to escape. I need some way out. I think that's enough to prepare you. Of course, we're going to be open to questions when you come. And of course, someone is going to be there with you during the process. So you can, it's okay to open your eyes if you need to, and put your hand up and say, I'm experiencing this. And if you're uneasy about it, then help is there available. So the next thing we want to do is go through what the process itself is. There are really kind of 4 elements to that. I think you know, but just describe a little bit. During this process of breathing, there is a track of music that's playing. And Stan developed this after observing in those many subjects the sort of sequence one might go through in experiencing one of these non-ordinary states. And so the music is designed, the first it's about 2.5, 2 3/4, 3 hours long. First portion is a heavy driving beat, and together with our breath, that helps us move into this holotropic state. Then there's a sequence that's kind of more emotional, which helps us to connect with some of the material that may be there waiting our attention to come to it. And then after that, there's a sequence that's a little more relaxing, a little more settling in, a little more concluding that inner work. And finally, something I could almost use the word transcendent again, with just a light, easy movement back into a very subtle portion of this ordinary state that we all experience. Maybe let me turn it over to you, CL, to talk about those remaining parts of the process.
Yeah, so I'm first also going to label the parts of the process. So you have them kind of the broad stroke of it. So there's music, there's breathing, there's trust, and we'll talk more about trust and what should be trusted, and then there's integration. And all of those are important in a holotropic breathwork experience. So Jeffrey just went into quite a bit of detail about the music, and that is a fairly long set of music, 2.5 up to 3 hours. One thing that he didn't say is that the music is played very loud. So just that it becomes a very key feature in the experience. So it is loud music, but not unbearably loud. And like he said too, there's a particular sequence to the music. So again, that was music, breath, trust, and integration. So the breathing itself, there's a very specific form of breathing that we go over in more detail just before you do a holotropic breathwork session. But basically, the breathing is faster, deeper, and connected. And those are all very important. Each one of those is important. So it's not just fast, it's fast and deep. So maybe as a little example, I'll breathe through my mouth, although right now, just so you can get the example, but holotropic breath work is done through your mouth or your nose or alternating, whatever feels right to you. But faster might be like, that's faster than I normally breathe. But when I make it deeper, really filling up the lungs, it's like a shallow fast breath might be. Those are shallow fast breathing. These are deeper fast breaths, and they're connected, which means the difference between the out breath and the in breath, there's no pause. It just continues in a connected way. So that's an important part of the breathing, and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly what that could be like for you. But again, it's unique to the individual. Now, how long do we do this faster, deeper, connected breath? The instruction is we continue to breathe in this fashion until we're surprised. Surprised by something that feels a little out of the ordinary. It could be kind of what seems like a biographical experience, but maybe surprised like, oh, I didn't realize that would come up for me. So surprise doesn't necessarily mean it's like very, very, very foreign to us, but we didn't expect that just listening to music and breathing faster, deeper, connected would bring up such a feeling. So we do it, we breathe, and when that surprising event happens, internal event happens, we often will just naturally not even consider the breathing process. Later in the process, if things feel like they're flat or stuck, then we can return to the faster, deeper, connected breath. We'll also be doing the process lying down. So that faster, deeper, connected breath is something that you do lying down. And as Jeffrey said before, there'll be someone by your side just to offer support. Now, a few people get a little concerned about this faster, rapid breathing of holotropic breath work because they're afraid that it could lead to hyperventilation and that this hyperventilation could be dangerous. Now, Jeffrey and I had the great honor of having a holotropic breath work with another MD who is very, very experienced in this. So Stan Groff was the one that did a lot of research on the East Coast using LSD for his entry into non-ordinary states to see how that entry could affect people in terms of moving towards wholeness. Dr. Eierman did his studies in a Midwestern hospital, psychiatric hospital. And Dr. Eierman had been trained in breath work and thought that it would probably be of value in this psychiatric hospital he was working with, and started a study where he trained the nurses to be the person who would sit next to the patient while he would play the music and instruct people in this breathing. After some time, the other doctors at the hospital came to him, and Dr. Eierman is so friendly. People just call him Jimmy, and they'd say, Jimmy, what is this you're doing? You're playing this loud music to these patients lying in their bed and the nurses are sitting by their side. It seems like a kind of waste of our resources, and what good is it doing? We don't think you should continue this program. So Dr. Eierman said, before we stop the program, I ask you, just once will you do this holotropic breath work with me? And then make your decision. So those other doctors decided that they would do the holotropic breath work in the same way that Dr. Eierman set it up for the patients. And after one breath work experience, they said, oh, we see the value of what you're doing. Let's continue the program. And so over several years, The study included 11,000 psychiatric patients from a variety of psychiatric units and really had powerful effects of change. The procedure was very well received. There were no complaints of adverse reactions during all of these sessions. Dr. Ironman was asked actually about this idea about what about hyperventilation, and he said that what he had been experienced in all of these patients, that what he called this voluntary overbreathing. He said hyperventilation often comes like if we're having a panic attack, and it's not a voluntary quick response to the breath, it's kind of involuntary. But these deeper, faster connected breaths, which he called a voluntary overbreathing, don't bring in the risks of hyperventilation that other forms of rapid breathing do. We do have a couple of abstracts written by Dr. Ironman that are linked to our website. And if you want more information about his study or about his study with these 11,000 patients or an abstract on hyperventilation, look at our site and look at it. It was just very comforting to me to realize there's no danger in this. There's a lot of patients that were studied and found to be helped by holotropic breathwork with great results. Now, I also mentioned that in addition to the music, the breathing, that trust is a big part of holotropic breathwork, and there's a particular trust. So we call it trust the inner healer. Jeffrey's already referred to the inner healer briefly, but tell us more about the inner healer, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it's an interesting term that Stan brought in, and of course, well, I don't know if it's of course, in the way I see it anyway, I mean, one wouldn't have to give this tendency, this sense of a person, but in a way it's kind of useful to, if we use another archetype, this being the archetype of the healer. You go to a healer, whether that's your MD or some other form of help that you're looking for, because you trust that person to be both well-informed and wise. That is, to be able to discern what's the issue, what's underlying the problem that you're bringing in, but also able to marshal if not a complete solution, then at least the first few steps to a solution. And what Stan observed in the context of these thousands of sessions, both with LSD and with holotropic breathwork, is that given the opportunity, what he called inner healer, that is the part of us, it's another archetype, isn't it? That aspect of our own self that recognizes what's needed next. If you've got a huge pile of something and it's all stuck and you need to move it, you've got to play around till you find the one that's a little bit loose and work that one out first, yes? So like that, how are we going to discern, well, what's the thing that I need to work on today? And that's why we said earlier, you come in without a fixed agenda. You come in willing to enter into that state and allowing your own inner healer to find what's the next piece. So all that we ask you to do, and we ask you to just do this, is to follow those directions of breathing faster and deeper, and breathing until something surprises you. And how long this takes for that surprise to arise, it's going to vary from person to person. There's no fixed timetable here. It's very subjective. But the point there is that then you allow your attention to be pulled to that and support it just by continuing the breath. So frankly, sometimes these things are pretty darn inscrutable. You might think, why did that happen? What was that about? Often later on, like maybe later that evening, it's finally come, oh yes, that felt like this thing did so long ago that I've repressed for so long. But whether it gets clear or not, the instruction, yeah, I think instruction's an okay word. This very strong advice that we have is to bring in this element of trust into your inner journey, to allow nature's own orderliness to create the map for you to move forward in the manner that's really going to support your healing, your evolution. We don't have to coach. We don't have to direct. Just take those simple steps. I think you were going to talk about integrations here.
Yeah, so we talked about those 4 aspects: the music, the breath, trusting in their healer, and then integration is a part of every breathwork experience. And I sometimes like to use the analogy, if I eat a meal, it might only take me, 10 minutes to eat the meal, but it takes hours to digest the food that my body has just eaten. And the digestion process, if we don't allow the digestion to happen and think that everything happened in just the consumption, we'd be vastly mistaken. So in the same way with the breath work, is that in addition to the breathing session, we always include some kind of integration work afterwards. And that will happen the same day you do your breath work, that there'll be some form of integration. One thing that we do that's is we also bring some of the integration into some symbolic work, often perhaps drawing a symbol that somehow represents the experience that you had. Jung, famous psychiatrist back from the turn of the past century, was talked about mandalas and the value of the form of a kind of mandalic representation of life experiences. And so we ask people to create some kind of creative expression of what has just happened in their breathwork process. We'll talk a lot more about this. So that's one form of integration, is to capture the experience in a non-verbal way. But then there's also some verbal integration that happens as well, that we generally do as a group if you come to a group process, or we do it one-on-one with you if you come to an individual process. So we'll talk to you more about integration and what we suggest for you and what you can do after your breathwork session as well. But just to know that integration is a very, very important part of your breathwork experience. And so we'll want to make sure that there's time for that as well. Now, another thing that's important about breathwork is just the setting in which it takes place. So that the setting could be, depends on whether or not you come as for a one-on-one session, that either Jeffrey or I would lead you individually in a breathwork experience, or you came to a group weekend type experience that we might be offering. So there's a different kind of setting for each one, but both of those settings, there will be someone that's with you, as Jeffrey was talking, throughout the experience. In the case of a group practice, what we do is we divide the group into, we use the word a breather and a sitter. Now, of course, everybody's breathing, but those that are experiencing the process, we just refer to them as a breather. And everyone will have a partner that comes with, that we select during the process of the weekend to sit next to you while you are going through the process of holotropic breathwork. And then in addition to everyone having their own personal sitter, Jeffrey or I would also be there in the same room. If it's a case of a group, both of us would be there. If it's one-on-one, then one or the other would be there. So if it's actually one-on-one, we would be both your sitter and your facilitator. If it's a group, you'll have a sitter, and then we'll also have a facilitation going on at the same time. We keep holotropic breathwork events rather small in number, so there's a great feeling of safety that we can offer support to everyone that's in the room. And so that's part of the setting of safety, the setting of confidentiality, the setting of enough time to allow the process to come to its own completion. So also the setting for a larger group event of holotropic breathwork generally starts with some introductory remarks, even more specifics than what we're giving here. And then we'll follow with a full day of experiencing. If it's a group event, it will start from about 9 o'clock in the morning and go all the way until about 9 o'clock at night. And this gives time for you to have the holotropic breathwork experience of the 2.5 to 3 hours of music with a sitter next to you, followed by a time of integration, followed by a break for a meal, and then coming back again in the afternoon, and the breathers and sitters swap places, and again another 3 hours or so of the music to breathing to music, integration, another meal, and then the whole group takes a break and comes back again for another couple of hours in the evening to really complete the integration process. So the whole setting is very carefully laid out. We would ask someone to make sure they have time to be at every part of the whole breathwork experience. If you do it on your own, one-on-one, it's taking more like 4 to 5 hours completely for one person, as opposed to that 12 hours that it takes as a group. So, Jeffrey, is there anything else about the setting that comes to mind for you that you'd like to add?
Well, I guess the only thing that comes to mind to me to add about the setting is, as we try to provide it, is it's very much our objective just to have you be really comfortable. So that means we're going to do whatever we can imagine to do in any particular case to make the setting really support your inward experience, which really means to make the setting as neutral, as unobtrusive for you at every moment as it can be.
Beautiful, thank you. Now, as I think over about what we've just shared with you today, there's one more thing that I thought to bring up to you. We did talk about how Stan and Christina Groff developed holotropic breathwork based on research with LSD. And because of this, some people expect that during their holotropic breathwork experience, they would have psychedelic visions that would come to them. And it's generally not the case. I think in the work that Dr. Eierman did, he said that 82% of his patients had more of that, might have had actually a mythic poetic experience, a kind of transpersonal experience. Although not even everyone has that, because some people's experience are more energetic or biographical. But we don't commonly find people to have hallucinogenic psychedelic experiences. The non-ordinary state is what is very, very common, but not so common a psychedelic visual experience. And I like to point this out to people because sometimes people come with the expectation that is what's going to happen. Stan was not trying to duplicate a psychedelic experience, but try to set up a setting in which someone could find themselves in a non-ordinary state of experience or non-ordinary state of awareness. And it's that which brings the change that we're looking for, that leads us towards wholeness. So I just wanted to also kind of reiterate that for everyone. And we hope to hear from you. Next step would be to do some more of your own research into holotropic breathwork. Contact us and ask us questions. We love to talk to you about it. And we'd love to assist you in making the decision about coming to a holotropic experience. So keep in touch. What would you like to say in closing, Jeffrey?
Keep in touch was good, but I guess I'd like to say in closing that, you know, it works. Mm-hmm. We've done a lot of investigation in the whole, in the overlapping range of non-ordinary states and healing of past trauma, and it's an effective combination. There are obviously lots of instances where people use various means to enter an unordinary state and may receive some benefit from that. What is really special about this is the element of safety, the fact that you don't need to take any kind of substance to do this. The amount of research that's been done that substantiates and informs, gives the platform for the way this work is pursued, and just the experience of thousands and thousands of people, really all over the world. I mean, we often get, we get emails from people in the group that somebody was in China and had 300 people at a breathwork session in China, all over Western Europe and Eastern Europe, even in Africa and South America. This is work that's really well received by human beings everywhere on the planet. And we just sincerely invite you, just see if it works for you. Give it a shot. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.